Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast, part of the Minute Media Podcast Network. This season, it's all grit. I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players, gaining more insight on what makes this team go. The Detroit Lions are now in a new, grittier era, and we look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. In this episode, we get you ready for the Detroit Lions Week 2 matchup versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We'll share what we expect from Tampa Bay coming into this game off their very own season-opening win. We'll also discuss how the Lions match up and what we expect from Detroit. That and more. Let's get to it, Lions fans.
Hey, everyone. This is Lomas Brown, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
Well, folks, as I'm sure you used to, joining me today is Coach Jerry Angers for the preview. He is former Michigan High School Coach of the Year, as well as Coach of the Week by the Detroit Lions, and has a new addition to his title. He is the current Scouting and Training Director for Bull Rush Sports. Coach, great to have you here, and congrats on the addition to the title.
No, I appreciate it. Anything to do with football is good.
All right. Well, and you know what? We have another person joining us, too. We're used to James Cook, senior sports writer for the Traverse City Record Eagle, being on the game recaps. You're also going to hear him on the previews as well with us, bringing the three-man show together here. You can also hear James on his podcast, The Get Around. That drops on Mondays. James, good to have you here for the previews. This will be fun.
Yeah, it should be. Thanks. I don't have any updates to my title, so it's just the same old, same old.
When your title's that good, I think you kind of just let it be, you know?
It's just short and sweet, right?
Well, folks, our intro today was Lomas Brown with the intro. It was going to be Lomas Brown for the post-game show with the Rams, but Jamison Williams had such a great game that I was like, you know what? Let's use JMO for the intro there. And the way the offensive line was in overtime, and maybe what we're hoping the offensive line can do this year, good to have Lomas's voice there with the introduction. Guys, we've got week 1 in the books. Any final thoughts on the Lions-Rams matchup before we start looking into week 2? Anything you wanted to throw out there?
I think there's room for growth. We talked about that. I think that's the biggest thing you'll see this week. I think you'll see an adjustment on the defense, coverage scheme, because they're going to be able to add some things. And I just think a lot of Dan Campbell said it best. They could have had offensive linemen from the high school playing on them. We still wouldn't have got to the quarterback. That's how quick they were throwing the ball. So I just think that's something that we'll adjust to this week. And hey, we won a football game. That's all that matters.
Exactly. And when you win a football game and it's not playing your best ball, it gives you a whole lot to build on and move forward on. And that's what excites me. Mm-hmm. We dominated in overtime, but throughout the second half, we had to face adversity. Didn't play our best game, yet came out with the victory. So we shouldn't be riding too high into week 2.
Yeah, and one interesting thing was Amon-Ra St. Brown on his podcast apologized to David Montgomery for missing a block in overtime that I think would have sprung Montgomery for a touchdown in that 21-yard run that he broke. It was the corner that Amon-Ra was nearest to that he I don't think he expected that play to be coming to his side or something, and Montgomery surprised him a little bit, and St. Brown wasn't quite ready for that and didn't have his guy blocked.
I'm not the greatest film study out there, but I know the exact play you're talking about because I watched and I saw Montgomery basically run into the guy that was supposed to be getting blocked. I'm like, who's out there blocking? I'm like, oh, that's St. Brown blocking? So that's actually, I mean, no shock, right? St. Brown's going to own anything, but that's cool that he talked about it and it all worked out. But that's awesome. All right, folks, as we get into this, here's Coach Campbell weighing in on the new opponent, the Tampa Bay Bucs, for week 2.
It's a tough physical team. They're disciplined, aggressive, particularly defensively. What they're doing offensively, is a lot of really kind of what we saw last week. And then on top of things, they do well and have done well with Baker and, having Evans out there, Godwin, that whole thing. But really good personnel. Quarterback's tough, man, competitive. So we got our hands full, but we're looking forward to the challenge of it.
Now, Coach Campbell said the Bucs looked tough on offense, and they looked good in week one, you guys. But he also talked about the big thing is for the Lions to improve from week one to week two. So let's talk about that. How do the Lions do that? How do they improve? If there's one area, one element that you're specifically looking for improvement from for the Detroit Lions from week one to week two, Coach, what's the one thing you want to see?
Well, I think they're improving, all positions. That's the biggest thing. Schemes are schemes, X's and O's or X and O's. But I think the biggest thing is for each guy to improve and get better from what they did last week. For instance, you just guys said St. Brown. This week, St. Brown's not going to miss a block. And that's the stuff that's gonna make a big difference as we move forward and get deeper into the league and into the season.
Yeah, I think I think the defensive line actually finishing those pressures and turning them into sacks is something that they can really turn. I mean, we talked about it last a couple of days ago in the Rams game about the receiver room maybe has some room to get better with some better depth. But I think that that finishing some of those pressures, turning them into sacks would definitely be helpful against this team. They have. I think it's going to be a James Houston game. I think he'll be up on the 53 and active in this game, just with what they have this week, because the Bucs don't get a whole lot of production receiving wise out of the tight end position, so there's not going to be those responsibilities for him. So he would just have free reign to just blitz the passer, which is what he's best at, and having the possibility of DJ Reader back, I think also helps the pass rush a little bit and would make James Houston a more viable play.
All right. Yeah. I'm kind of in the same boat you are there, James. A little bit more out of the pass rush. Nothing against it from last week. It was a great pass rush, and the Rams schemed against it really well. Like Coach said, as Coach Campbell talked about, if you had high school guys out there, Stafford was throwing the ball so quick, you weren't going to get to him. But different quarterback, and Matthew Stafford's a very good quarterback. Baker Mayfield's a good quarterback, but he's not on the same level as Matthew Stafford, at least not yet. Maybe someday, but that's a good way to look at what we're hoping to see from the Lions. Now, let's take a look and just see. It's early in the season, so let's just talk about how Tampa Bay is different from last year. We faced them in the playoffs, right? Second playoff team in a row to start the season. So let's see how Tampa Bay is different than the team we faced in the playoffs. What things might be the same, but what's different? Well, start with the draft, right? Every team's got a draft. They brought some new players in. First round, they get an offensive lineman in Graham Barton out of Duke. They get an edge guy late in the second round, Chris Broswell out of Alabama. They get a safety in the third round, Tyke Smith, and a wide receiver, Jalen McMillan, out of Washington in the third round as well. And then a guy actually that caught some eyeballs this past week was Bucky Irving, a fourth round running back. So those are some additions from the draft. James, what else have you seen from the roster makeup?
Well, they lost quite a bit from their defense. They lost Shaq Barrett. They lost Devin White in free agency. Ryan Neal was a starter at safety for him last year. He left and is still a free agent. And then they traded Carlton Davis to the Lions. So they've lost 4 starters right there on their defense. And in their draft, they drafted almost exclusively offense. They drafted Braswell, who's more of an edge guy, and then they added a corner in the third round. And that's it for the defense. Considering what they lost in free agency, it was interesting that they didn't draft a whole lot to restock that. But they felt good enough about their secondary that they were able to trade away Carlton Davis. They felt that they had the cupboard stocked pretty well there. The problem is 3 of those guys got hurt week 1.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about the depth there because you're right. In addition to having all those changes, some of those replacements aren't going to be there. And I don't know if we were nervous, but we in the back of our mind, we're sitting here thinking, Jonah Jackson's on the Rams now. And how's that going to affect the Lions week 1? And Campbell had talked about they had enough time in the offseason to change some names and stuff like that. And we've seen it before with like the Minnesota Vikings getting one of our backup quarterbacks right before the season. But now we're on the other side of this. We've got Carlton Davis here. Coach, Campbell already talked that they're going to get some information from him. Obviously, teams change a lot, but this can help with some of their game prep, right?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the big thing going back to the draft that you guys were talking about, and they stayed away the defensive side. Your head coach is the ex-defensive coordinator, Bowles. That guy, he just draws up schemes, and he's gonna, he can scheme off of that, whether it's one high safety, two high safeties, and whether they're blitzing somebody, whether they're bringing pressure, whether they're running games up front, he'll offset that. Which comes to what Davis is going to talk about how his philosophy is. On the coverage schemes, he may have something that he always did on third down and 6. He may have something that, hey, if we run a one high safety on this one, we're going to run a two high safety on the next one. So Davis is going to be able to give us a little bit and thought process. Maybe he runs something twice in a row. Maybe he only runs it in the first half and doesn't run in the second half. I'm sure they won't put too much on Davis to tell Jared Goff what to look for, but I'm sure the OCM, they met with him and talked some of those different things. And there may be a call or two that he can ignite the offense on a blitz concept or something like that. So, there's again, they won't spend a ton of time on it, but if you can get one thing that we may turn into a touchdown, it's a win for us.
That makes a lot of sense. And in addition to the players changing, you've got coordinators and stuff on a team. Offensive coordinator Liam Cohen. Coach, what can you tell me about him?
Well, he was with the Rams for 4 years. And so, his big thing when I was reading up on him, that's how I discovered it, was that, he wants to turn it into a run game. He wants to run the ball more. Last week we talked about that, 30 passes, 30 rushes. We talk about their passes and how many below the line of scrimmage and short passes were, which equates into the run game. So I think that's going to be a big thing. He was on the phone with Stafford. He's probably going to see, how did you get this? Why? And again, Stafford's going to probably say, and going to say, well, we had a banged up offensive line. We knew we had to get rid of the ball quick. And, he may give them, again, he may get something from them, to try to offset our defense. But I think AG is going to make an adjustment where he's going to suffer for that defense too. And, another thing too, is this is the third time we played this team in less than a year. If you think about it, right? We played them in the regular season. We played the playoffs. Now we're playing them again. And again, it's different for everybody, but it's still Todd Bowles is the head coach. And it's, and the defense concept. And now this guy has to figure out what our defense is with our additions that we've added. So it'll be interesting. It's a big chess match, and we like to play chess. We know that.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Yeah, and as we talked about Carlton Davis being with us now, it means, again, he's not with them. And so that's one more talented player that's on our side of the ball as opposed to theirs. And yeah, so what do we expect out of Tampa coming into this one? I mean, last year we saw them twice, and we had very different teams in each of those games as far as who the Lions had contributing and being available. But Tampa Bay looked really good in week one. Now, you shouldn't take too much from anybody's game in week one because it's week one, and we've seen lots of anomalies throughout the years. But Tampa Bay did beat Washington 37-20. Godwin and Evans, they're still looking like the Pro Bowlers they are. Baker Mayfield, a full year in the system now, or a full year with the team, and knowing the players and a lot of the personnel, even if they've made some adjustments. But James, what are you seeing? They got some new components in the running game, maybe a little bit, and Coach talked about them maybe wanting to run the ball more. Based on what you saw to week one, what are you expecting out of Tampa?
On offense, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, you mentioned, are still an elite pairing at wide receiver. And, they both had good weeks last week. I mean, Mike Evans had 2 touchdowns. All he ever does is score a touchdown almost every week, it seems like. And then they added the 3rd round pick, Jalen McMillan, which is the pick that they got for Carlton Davis to that. And he's been their slot guy this year. So their receivers could be really good. So the their matchup of their receivers against the Lions secondary, I think, is a big matchup. And then the Lions receivers against their secondary, which is very depleted, could be a big thing. I mean, they had 3 corners who left the game against the Commanders with injuries. Starter Zion McCallum got a concussion. Not sure if he's going to be back this week. Josh Hayes, who's one of their primary backups, hurt an ankle, and Bryce Hall, who's probably about their 3rd or 4th guy, broke his leg, and he's done for the season. An interesting thing about Hall, though, is his first interception in the NFL was with the Jets off of Jared Goff. And they're also without safety Antoine Winfield, who's out with an ankle injury for a couple weeks. So he's not going to probably play either. So that secondary is really depleted, kind of like the Rams' offensive line was last week. And they saw the Lions take advantage of that and get a lot of pressures. The Lions had I think it was the 2nd highest pressure rate in the whole NFL last week. So they were able to take advantage of that against the Rams, and hopefully they can take advantage of the secondary against the Bucs.
Well, that's the thing. That offensive line was depleted. They didn't get a lot of sacks, but that's because the Rams schemed against it. But the pressure is what caused Stafford to miss a throw or two here and there, and that was the difference in the game. So even though it didn't show up in the sack line, it was there in the stat line under pressures, and it definitely influenced things. Now, Coach, we talked about the addition of some running components. Rachaad White is a running back who receives a lot out of the backfield. Is that going to be somebody Anzalone's going to be spying on, or how do you think the Lions might deal with a running back who is a legit receiving threat? I mean, last week, Rachaad White, he carried the ball 15 times for only 31 yards, but he had 6 catches for 75. One went for 32 yards.
Yeah, I know. And that's, I was looking at that. Of course, watched the film a couple times today just from this game. Godwin had 7 first downs. I mean, they used some good schemes, running guys up, using Evans, run them off, running that quick out, running the flare. One of the stats that I looked up was, your passing concept. Where's Baker Mayfield throw the ball? Okay. So we got, I always put it into 2 different groups. Basically, short pass, which is 0 to 9 yards, and then the behind the line of scrimmage pass. Okay, so let me throw a couple stats out at you, which I think is going to come, which also works into the passing game. If you run against a really good run stopping defense, they throw those little quick outs to the backs and stuff like that. So I kind of started looking at that. This year, again, we've only got 1 game, but 73% of those passes that he threw out of those 30 passes that he attempted were behind the line of scrimmage or a short pass 0 to 9 yards. 73%. Last year it was 58%, and then the playoffs against us last year was 57%. So that's one of the things. 13 of those passes were behind the line of scrimmage on Sunday. We're behind the line of scrimmage. So that's exactly what you just brought up. Now they're gonna, if they can't run the ball, then they're gonna start dinking and dunking and getting the things, running guys off, running the deeper routes with that really good receiving, those 2 good receivers, and then dumping the ball. So yeah, Anzalone is going to be, he's going to be out on an island. Some of those D linemen are going to be out on an island, those DN outside linebacker type guys. So I think those are something that, we're going to have to look. Last year in the playoff game, which again, new OC, they were running double crossers and shallow crossers with their tight end, with the Otten, right? Because we had talked about him last year. So I think those are things you're gonna look at. The way the Rams attacked us with those short passes, and then of course those deep out routes. I think you're gonna see something like that. I believe they're gonna try to establish a run, but then they're gonna when that doesn't work, because if Reader's playing, you better put Baker Mayfield in a 3-step, 4-step drop and get the ball out of his hands. And so I think you're going to see some of those dumps, and I think that's a good one. And again, 1 game with this new OC, but 13 passes behind the line of scrimmage. 13 passes behind the line of scrimmage out of 13. That's almost 50%. So it's a good sign that we will be working on that, and defensively we can talk about that too.
Well, do you think that Tampa might? Everybody's watching game film from week 1, and knowing that the Rams had as much success as they did on those short passes against the Lions, do you think that's something that Tampa might try? Now, again, Baker Mayfield's not Matthew Stafford, and Stafford's such a great quarterback that he could make that stuff happen, but not without error because he had some mistakes. But do you think that's something Tampa might try to employ?
Oh, I definitely think so. I think that's one of the things. The thing I'm concerned with and worried about is, he is not Stafford, but he's Baker Mayfield, and the guy will make a play. He'll take a shot. He'll run the ball. I'll post a video of Davenport the other day, keeping Stafford in the pocket, and he has to airmail one out of bounds, and where Baker Mayfield may take off on that. But if we can contain him and keep him in the pocket, we know there's going to be a problem. Again, you're talking about playing a team just like last week that we knocked off in the playoff. You're talking about playing a team that we beat twice last year. The third time is always really, really tough. And I love Baker Mayfield, and I go back to this comment that he made. I think it was in the Super Bowl. Somebody had asked him, "Hey, you've been working on your passing, and you've been working on doing different things, and you've been since the season ended." And his statement was, "Well, I can tell you, is the last pass I completed was to Derek Barnes." And so those are things that tell me Baker Mayfield he's just been thinking about this game, and he's going to play one of his best games, just like Stafford played one of his best games. So, but again, they're going to try to exploit what the Rams did.
And you know what? That's exactly it too, right? This ended their season last year in Ford Field. They're coming back for it. James, what type of motivation is that for Baker? What are you expecting out of Baker? Anything else out of Tampa that you want to talk about?
Yeah, well, I think obviously Baker is motivated for this game, like Jerry said about the ending the year with an interception. But it's interesting to note that the Bucs were a game better last year with Baker at quarterback than they were the year before with Tom Brady at quarterback. Obviously two different teams, but they were not a bad team at all with Baker Mayfield, and they won their division. Another reason I think why I think James Houston will be more of a factor in this game is that he's always tended to have better games and be used more against teams with quarterbacks who aren't afraid to run. With Stafford as a pocket passer, that's not exactly the best for James Houston. Because he's better going around the tackles rather than in. But with a mobile quarterback, he's had excellent games and good to chase them down too when they do escape the pocket. And Baker Mayfield won't hesitate to do that. I think people don't think of him as a running quarterback, but he'll do that 2 or 3 times a game, and those can be big plays that really extend drives.
Oh, for sure. That makes a lot of sense with what Baker can do, and that's the thing. Stafford can't he can scramble still well, but he doesn't run like he used to due to the hits he's taken over his career and stuff like that. But, again, we saw his elusiveness and whatnot and how tough that was for the Lions to actually get him down on a couple of plays. I think Campbell even said it seems like the more you hit Stafford, the better he gets. And so Baker, though, is just as fierce of a competitor. And so Let's move over then to what we expect out of the Lions. You talked about James Houston. You think he's going to be in there playing a role in this one? Even though the Lions felt like they were just getting cut down, 5 to 7 yards at a time, they held the Rams to 20 points. That's fewer points than they gave up to the Rams in the playoffs last year. And so that defense should be commended, especially considering all those guys were playing together in the secondary for basically the first time. You're starting a true rookie at defensive back. He's going to get picked on by a very good quarterback. And by every metric, he held up. And even those penalties that happened, none of us were upset about those penalties. They might have been penalties, but they were like, barely a penalty. And like Campbell said, he was doing the right stuff. He just maybe did a little too much stuff. So, Coach, I'll start with you. What are you expecting out of the Lions coming into this one?
Defensively, I think that's one of the biggest things. One of the things I'm be interested to see is Arnold is man up with him. Let's talk about that. With man up with Evans. That's one of the things. And will he not push the envelope on that? So I think that's one of the big things there with the Arnold concept. You guys talked about, James made a good point about having Houston out there because he's got some juice. He's got some wheels. He could run, Baker down if he does scramble in those situations. So I think those are some of the things we want to see, defensively. Are we able to offset Evans? He's a big dude. He's going to get his catches. We got to keep them in. Again, we got to go back to our defense against the Rams. We made them kick field goals. We intercepted them in the end. We were bending, but we never broke. And I think those are the biggest things that defensively, if we're continue talking about the defense, what we got to see, what's our coverage going to be? I'm going to tell you, we ran some cover 2 last week. First thing I was thinking is, why are we not running cover 2 to offset those little short passes? Because you set your corners down on there, or we used to call it cloud, where you roll a corner down and cover 3. And we did that. We did that, but you have to push with the receiver. You have to go with the receiver to make it look like it's man coverage, and then you fall off it. Stafford was getting that ball out so quick, the fall off wasn't there quick enough, but we made some tackles and really didn't give up any huge plays defensively, from that standpoint. Any broken, quick catch and go. So, we did. We missed a couple sacks. But
James, how about you on the defensive side of the ball? What are you thinking from the Lions? I totally agree with the James Houston thing, having him in there with that speed to be able to pursue Baker if he slips outside, more of a traditional pass rush situation. What are you looking for the Lions defense? What are you expecting out of them?
Well, I mean, I don't know, the Bucs are going to pose a little, obviously a very different look than the Rams. Although, like we said, that Evans and Godwin are great receivers. But if anybody's going to know how to cover Mike Evans, it's Carlton Davis, who had to cover him every day for years in practice. So I think that's maybe a little bit of an advantage, and I think he can tell people too on how to cover Chris Godwin. I think Evans is probably going to fall into Davis just because of the size matchup, and then somebody else is going to have to cover Godwin, probably Terry and Arnold, and so I think you got that little bit of advantage there with him having that insight into how to cover those guys and what their strengths and weaknesses are. If anybody knows it, he does. And then the Bucs do have a couple of guys that were out last week on their defensive line that'll be back this week too. So I think that'll affect the Lions offense if you go back to that a little bit. In Kalijah Kancey and Logan Hall, they both could be back this week, but they're not for sure. And the Commanders were able to run on Tampa, but a lot of that was Jaden Daniels. It wasn't the running backs. So Daniels had 88 of their 138 rush yards. So the running backs didn't do a whole lot against Tampa.
Yeah, and that's something we did well against Tampa. In the playoff game, we gave up 89 yards total rushing against Tampa. The more we can make them one-dimensional, the better that bodes for us. And our defensive backfield is arguably better than what we had out there during our playoff run last year. And so I think the big key is trying to slow that run game down enough that they feel like they have to be more one-dimensional. And so stopping the running game as well as we did in week 1 and maybe watching out for the dump off screen pass on an over pursuit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then with their offense, Bucky Irving, I think, gives them a pretty decent 1-2 combo with Rachaad White. Not exactly the Monty Gibbs combination, but maybe a poor man's version of that. But neither of them is the pounder that Montgomery is. They're both kind of smaller backs, and either one of them's 200 pounds. More receivers out of the backfield and stuff like that. But they do have two now to come at you with, whereas last year it was pretty much just Rachaad White that they were confident in rolling out there in the run game.
All right, well, James, let's jump over to the offense then for the Lions. What are you looking to see out of the Lions offense coming out here against Tampa in week 2?
Well, Tampa's defense was able to shut down Washington through the air. I think part of that may have been that Jaden Daniels was making his debut in the NFL. He looked pretty hesitant in throwing the ball his first game and looked very, very nervous. But Tampa had a bit to do with that too. And then that kind of changed as the game went on, in part because Tampa was ahead, so they kind of reduced their coverages a little bit, played a little bit more conservative. But Daniels also got a little bit more confident there, and those injuries started to sink in too on the secondary for Tampa Bay, and just more playing kind of a preventish defense. I don't think the Lions will see that.
No, probably not. We sure hope not.
You would hope not.
Coach, how about you? What are you looking for out of the Lions offense coming into this one?
The one thing I want to check and see if Jared Goff carries per rushes was more than Daniels, because he did have a big run in that game. So maybe we can exploit him by putting Goff on the run. Hopefully not. I think the biggest thing offensively is Jared recognizing Bowles' schemes, because they hide their blitzing concepts and their coverage concepts so well. They give you one look, and then it might end up on another look. And that, going back to Davis, that's something that he's probably going to be able to help us out on. The other thing from there would be, how are we going to try to identify pre-snap reads from that, so that Goff knows, hey, it's a cover 2 look. I can hit the seam route. Hey, I know it's a cover 1. I can hit the pick route, whatever. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing for them is being able to identify that, because Bowles does such a great job defensively, to offset and to try to make the quarterback overthink and not do what he's supposed to do. So, that's going to be the biggest thing with that. And again, St. Brown, I think they're going to push him, to have one of his games like he normally can, and again, last week, there was a ton of plays that I watched where he was actually running coverages off so that JMO could run that crossing route and stuff like that. So, and Laporta, and I think that's one of the things. I think they're going to try to establish Brown early to get him ready to go. Then maybe he won't miss another block. and I think that we'll try to establish the run game. I mean, they have to be worried about that. And hopefully we go and do what we do best, and that's basically run the rock and then use play action pass to open up the receivers.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing as far as that running game goes. I think the Lions want to establish that early, because when you've got that great of an offensive line, that good of a top 2 running back combination, you establish that, because then that puts the defense a little bit on their heels a little bit, as far as they don't know exactly what you're going to do. And if they have to worry about the run, I guess I said it puts them on their heels. They can't go backwards because they have to worry about the run, but then that also opens up the pass, and it opens opportunities for blown coverages too, and sets up the play action as well. So, yeah, I'm expecting them to try and get that run game going early for the Lions. Well, let's talk about major storylines, unexpected things going on here. Let's start with injuries. James, you've already kind of brought this up from the Bucs side. Give a little recap. What are the Bucs dealing with? And then we'll get into the Lions injury report.
Yeah, the Bucs are going to come into this game a little shorthanded, especially in the secondary. I mean, even if some of those guys can come back, I doubt all of them can. So they're going to be at least missing one safety and one corner, and possibly up to 3 corners, depending on if the one passes concussion protocols. And he's one of their starting corners to start the season. So they're going to have that. They got 2 defensive linemen that didn't play last week that look like they're going to be maybe likely to play this week, kind of like DJ Reader for the Lions. But we'll see. And one of those is Kalijah Kancey, who we know is was a high pick in the draft last year. And then the Lions have a pretty long list on their early injury report as well.
Yeah, the injury report came out on Wednesday about the Lions, and one more thing on the Bucs thing though is if there's one thing that an area you don't want to be short on, it's probably defensive backs, because that's an area that's really hard to cover up for, especially when you got a quarterback like Jared Goff going.
Yeah. Look at last year's Detroit Lions.
There you go. All right, so Lions injury report. Again, this is just what came out at the end of the day on Wednesday, and the encouraging thing is Carlton Davis and DJ Reader and Lawrence Strickland are all practicing, mostly Carlton Davis and DJ Reader, meaning Reader is trending towards playing, and Carlton Davis, who did get injured in the game, the season opener, looks like he's a full participant, so that's good because you want to have him out there. Jamison Williams was limited in practice, which probably doesn't shock anybody considering he was down on the turf. And let me tell you, it got quiet at Ford Field when that happened. Like, it was like everybody was holding their breath because they saw how dynamic and electric this guy was already becoming. And when he got up and was able to walk off the field, it wasn't just a cheer. You heard J-Mo being cheered. They were like, J-Mo. I mean, it was quite a transition because everybody was really nervous because of what he can mean to this offense. But then we got the news of people who did not practice, and it could be a small thing, could be medium, and don't know. Penei Sewell, Ifeatu Melifonwu, Kirby Joseph, and Marcus Davenport. I guess Sewell did get injured a little bit during the game and played through it. It was his ankle. Iffy is dealing with an ankle, which he has been. Kirby Joseph says hamstring, and Marcus Davenport says groin. Coach, did you want to weigh in on any of this, on what it looks like?
Yeah, I mean, it looks bad when you see it, but again, weighing in on it, looking at it again, we're not there in the reports. They all finished the game. That's the biggest thing. Those guys all finished the game and went through it. Precautionary, maybe to hold them out, rested a little bit. What's today practice? Walkthroughs, what, I don't know exactly what they do. And so, probably getting treatments. Most of that was, they weren't on the field when the press was able to watch. So who, we don't know. I mean, I don't know, and we don't know if they practice after that. So yeah, we'll wait and see. But I saw Sewell twist his ankle, got down, took him, kind of limped off the field, and thought, he hurt his ankle pretty bad in practice a few weeks back, and he was screaming at the trainers to tape it because he wanted to go back in and finish practice, and they said no. So, let's let the medical staff do what they do and just make sure they get him back by Sunday.
Yeah, that'll just be something to monitor throughout the week and see how that looks come this weekend. Lions made some moves. Let's talk about this. They finally signed that kicker that they talked about a month or two ago, and they brought in Greg Joseph to the practice squad. He was at Packers training camp. He spent the last 3 seasons with the Minnesota Vikings. Let's just start with Joseph there. Are you guys surprised they brought in a kicker? What are your thoughts on that, James?
I think it's just kind of insurance for Jake Bates. Then they said earlier, even in preseason, before they had, went with Jake Bates as their starter, that they were probably going to bring somebody else in. They just never really did. So now I think they had a spot for one, and they just brought Greg Joseph in. He's an NFL veteran. He was with the Vikings for the last, I think, three seasons. So maybe he can also be somebody to just help Jake Bates as well, with his form, or any number of things that kickers do. The Lions do play Minnesota in Week 6, so it maybe also gives them a little bit of a look at what maybe Minnesota is looking to do on special teams.
Yeah, that could be as well. And Coach, it's a kicker. But let me ask you this: like, the fact that they're going to have Greg Joseph in the house, I mean, kicker injuries don't happen all the time, but they do. We've seen it. We've seen it here with the Lions. But if for some reason you needed to make a change at kicker, what's the advantage? Explain the advantage to having a guy who's been in house for 3-4 weeks versus bringing someone off the street a day or two beforehand. It's just a kicker. That's all they do is go up and kick, right?
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, 2 things. You got an insurance. You guys are actually 3 things. You got insurance. Second thing is you have somebody that's been in the league, that can help Bates. Like you guys said. I mean, it's big. Third thing is, you always want to make sure that there's somebody there, and you're not out there. If somebody gets hurt and trying to find them. They carried 2 kickers last year. They're carrying 2 kickers this year. That's normal. It's not anything against Bates. And the third thing on that is kickers are kind of in their own little world. And poor Bates, if he doesn't have a kicking partner with him, him and Fox probably talk a little bit, but they're all, the kickers are always off on the side, kicking the net, holding the ball, spinning around, drinking Gatorade, kicking by themselves. Now he has another guy to talk to. So I think there's a lot of things. And first thing when I saw that was, but he's going to pick his brain. And I think it's good to bring a veteran in, a guy that's been around that can help him, continue what he's doing right now. And that's being a great kicker for us.
Yeah, I think another thing that it helps out too in practice is it helps Jack Fox. I think that with the new kickoff rules, they're going to be practicing special teams a lot more, and they maybe don't necessarily want Jack Fox to have to do 20 kickoffs in a practice and have another NFL veteran there to take some of that pressure off of him. So they saw what happened with Badgley. during the preseason, and maybe that was something where he was doing too much of that. So maybe just to kind of share that workload in practice, because there's an increased workload now of working on special teams with the new formation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you get to know the guys you're working with. And so if a guy comes in, you already have a rapport with these people. And so it might not be the biggest thing in the world, but every little bit helps. And the more familiarity you have with somebody, because even though they're both right-footed kickers, you would think that, well, maybe one does something slightly different. So another move, Chris Smith was brought back to the practice squad, not a shock there. And then Kyle Pecco was actually signed to the active roster. Either you guys want to weigh in on the Kyle Pecco moving to the active roster spot?
James, you might know more of that. Was he a guy going to make more money if they had him on the active roster spot? I mean,
well, yeah, when you get called up from the practice squad, you immediately make more money,
right.
For that week at least. But also as a veteran, if you're on the team week 1, your contract is fully guaranteed for the rest of the season. Whereas if you're brought up and put on the team in week 2, it's not. So if he got hurt, Lions could reach an injury settlement with him and save some cap space, possibly. You see teams do that a little bit here and there with moving guys and putting them in. It's kind of like the same in MLB when they don't call their star rookie up on opening day so that they can, keep him for one more year because it doesn't start his rookie clock running. But this is kind of the opposite with veterans.
So, James, do you think Kyle Pecco is going to stay on the active roster from here on out then?
I think he'll be on the roster until Broderick Martin comes back off of IR. Yeah. So that gives them, 4 defensive tackles to rotate now the Reader's back. So I think that's what Terrell Williams likes, is having 4 defensive tackles to rotate instead of just counting on 3. And you saw, I think Chris Smith got 8 snaps last week, I think it was. I mean, so he played a bit. He got more snaps than Wingo, who I forgot about. He's the other guy in that rotation. He got 6 snaps. So they potentially have 5 defensive tackles active for next week if Reader's ready to go.
Yeah, and I think Pecco also played with Williams. He played for Williams before, so I think that's a big thing. I listened to his press conference today too, and he talked about Wingo and just said, "Look at, that kid can play," but he said we're pretty deep at that position, and we're just trying to bring him along slowly. So I think that's where Pecco might be, on that roster to help him get better, and then then they can start playing games with the practice squad. But Broderick Martin's the big one when he comes back and Reader comes back. But man, it's nice to be in that depth position that we're in right now.
It sure is. And the other area that we haven't talked about yet, which it does involve the practice squad, is wide receiver. And Coach Campbell talked about it where he wouldn't commit to anybody. And I'm not shocked by that answer because he wants them to battle every single day this week. He might know in the back of his head there might be a leading candidate, but Campbell's going to give everyone every opportunity to push through. I am pretty optimistic that Tom Kennedy will not be brought up this week. That's just a hunch I have because I was shocked when it happened last week. And we all talked about the need for size. And so I'm optimistic that the Lions will bring one of these guys up. Reminder, you can bring a guy up 3 times, and that's the limit. So the nice thing is with having the 3 guys, that's like 9 games right there. But the hope is, from my perspective, is that once you figure out who it is, if they figure out how to be that part of the offense they need them to, that person just stays on the active roster going forward, and they make some adjustments from there. James, start with you then, Coach. I want to hear from you. James, what do you see happening? Do you have any thoughts on the elevation this week? And then, Coach, we'll hear from you and hear how important it is to have that big guy out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll use one of the elevations on Tim Patrick if unless another roster spot opens up, if there's another injury or something, then I think maybe they may just sign Patrick's to the active roster. But I think they'll just elevate him and put him on the 48 that are active on game day to have that extra big target, that red zone target, a veteran wide receiver out there that they kind of lacked last week. We saw after St. Brown and Jamison Williams, they didn't, have a whole lot. Khalif Raymond flashed a little bit, And I like him, and as a backup wide receiver, I think he's great. But he's not big, and that's something that receiver room needs.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. I mean, just watching the game again today, seeing, Kennedy out there and there's, and I love him to death. He's been around forever. He's freaking, he's a Detroit Lion through and through, but you didn't have that big guy to keep those safeties off St. Brown. I mean, they bracketed St. Brown, everything he did, inside bracket, outside bracket. And so, you know what, if that's going to happen, then, maybe we can get a bigger receiver over there so he can run the safeties off and let St. Brown eat. And I think that's something you'll see this week.
That's great. And yeah, Tom Kennedy, Mr. Consistent. I think his biggest impact is on the practice squad, getting guys ready during the week, and his effort and his energy and the intensity that I've heard he brings to that gets everybody ready for it. But when you're talking size difference on the day of the game in general, a guy like Tim Patrick seems like the guy that everyone's clamoring for. We'll see if he's learned enough, if he's integrated enough, if it's another week that they give a shot to Donovan Peoples-Jones again, because he did play a handful of games last year with the Lions, or if it's Allen Robinson. Those are the three guys everyone's taking a look at to see what might happen by the end of the week. Guys, any other major storylines, anything unexpected we want to talk about before we get to predictions?
None. Not on my end.
Nope.
All right. Well, then let's get to predictions. Coach, we'll start with you. Again, those of you listening, we're not necessarily going to predict the final score. We're not necessarily going to predict who wins, although you're talking to three guys who believe the Detroit Lions are capable of winning every single game this year. We also know how the NFL works, and that usually doesn't happen. But what are you predicting? So, Coach, anything you want to predict out there?
Well, I predict when going gets tough, we're going to line up in 13 personnel and run them over because their defense is pretty good and they love to do a lot of blitzing and stuff like that. So I think you may see that happen. Basically, to establish a presence and who we are and what we're all about. So I'm seeing every one of the guys coming out of the tunnel with a hard hat on and a punch pail.
Nice. How about you, James?
I think that the Lions are favored by Vegas by 7 at home. I think it'll be more than that, and Hendon Hooker will actually get to do the kneel down at the end of the game.
Oh.
All
right. Well, my prediction is this. The Lions' running game is going to pick up where it left off, and the passing game is going to be better than week 1. The Lions ran for 163 yards in week 1 as a team. Now, I think 60 of those yards came in overtime, or maybe 45 or 50 because they had that one dump-off pass. I think they run for more than 163 yards as a team this week, and I think Goff throws for at least 250 yards this week. So that's my offense. And on defense, we had 2 sacks last week. I say we double it and we get 4 sacks this week.
All right. Can live with that.
All right, Coach, thanks for doing the preview with us as usual. Congrats again on the addition to the title, and can't wait till Sunday.
For sure, and I'm sure we'll be texting back and forth.
That we will be. And James, awesome addition to have you on the preview session. We got to keep this thing going. Thank you for all the insights and the stats.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thank you.
And folks, thank you for tuning in. You can find more episodes and content at notthesameoldlions.com. Be sure to tell your friends and family about the show. Like, comment on socials. Subscribe regardless of your listening platform. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.